Welcome, everybody, on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I am pleased to welcome you to our discussion with Lya Frank, a Holocaust survivor from the Netherlands. Before we begin, I would like to share a few words about the museum. Holocaust Museum LA is the first Holocaust survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. In the 1960s, a group of survivors worked together to create a memorial for their loved ones who perished in the Holocaust. And this memorial eventually became Holocaust Museum LA. These survivors did so at a time when the community was by and large not ready to hear about the Holocaust. Thanks to their courage and their foresight, these survivors established a museum with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. Furthermore, they mandated that our museum should always be free to the public, making Holocaust education accessible to everyone. Even though we are not able to be in our museum's physical space for the time being, we are still able to carry forward their mission. This morning, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Lya Frank, who will share her story with you. And afterwards, you can type in questions in the Q&A box, and Lya will answer as many questions as possible. Lya has been speaking at our museum for several years now and has participated in all of our educational programs, and we are so honored to have her here with us. Lya, thank you so much for joining us. It is such an honor to introduce you and to have you speak and share your story with us this morning.
Thank you, Michael. Nice introduction. And good morning to everyone. I see there are so far 25, 26, 25 participants. So good morning to everyone, wherever you might be tuning in from. My name is Lya Frank, and I was born in the Netherlands in 1936. Actually, I was born April 17th, 1936. And on April 17, 1939, I received the best birthday present anyone could ever wish for. I received a little sister. So the Nazis uninvited the Netherlands on May 10th, 1940. Up until that day, I had a lovely youth. I had a large family. I had two parents. I had a sister. I had two grandmothers, a grandfather, lots of uncles and aunts and cousins, and further removed family members. I was a happy little girl. And to put it into perspective, when the war ended on May 5th, 1945, I was a 9-year-old girl. I was an orphan. I had one sister and one uncle left. So let's begin at 1940. The Germans invaded Holland, totally unexpected. So Holland was not prepared to fight. And therefore, the army was not in good shape. They put up a valiant fight for a few days, which took the Germans too long. So after about 3 or 4 days, they sent in a squadron of bombers with the intention of bombing the port, the harbor of Rotterdam, which was at the time and probably still is the main harbor, the main port in Western Europe. However, they were so anxious to bomb that they missed the harbor and they completely bombed the inner city of Rotterdam flat. Hundreds of people were killed by just being in their homes, and thousands were homeless. The complete inner city was destroyed. Thousands had to flee the city. They were maimed, they were hurt, they were broken, they had nothing left. They had to flee the city. And from then on, those people were called evacuees from Rotterdam. Now, there's a reason why I mentioned that, and that will become more clear a little bit later in the story. So the Germans then occupied Holland, the Netherlands. Our own government, a queen and her family fled the country. The queen went to London. Her family was safely ensconced in Canada, and we were under Nazi regime. The Germans were very smart, and they did not make too many changes in the government rule. So they kind of lulled the population into being accepting. If that is the worst that's going to happen, it's not so bad. We can live with it. Of course, from one thing came another. And at one point, probably by the middle of by the beginning of 1941, the rules became, I would say, 90% against the Jews. What was the purpose? They wanted to eradicate everything that was not the pure Aryan race. And the first scapegoat, of course, were the Jews. Then came the gypsies, then came the gays, then came some Catholics. So by 1941, these were the rules, some of the rules. We Jews could not go to the park. We could not go to public school. We could not go to the theater. We were not allowed to have bicycles. All Jewish professors, CEOs, CFOs, higher management, arbitrarily fired. Jewish children could only go temporarily to Jewish day schools. Jewish doctors could only treat Jewish patients. And we were not allowed to shop in certain places. Like nowadays, we say no dogs allowed. Well, at that time, it was no Jews allowed. We were not allowed to go outside be on the street after 5 o'clock. We were not allowed to go on the street before a certain hour. Remember, I was only 4 years old, so I wasn't really aware what was happening, besides the fact that I was sheltered by my parents. I was 4, going on 5. My sister was 1, going on 2. By the way, I don't want to keep saying my sister. Her name is Ellie. So 1941, the active chase after the Jews became very real. It started in Amsterdam, and at one point I had an uncle who just got married. He was a brother to my mother, Max, and he and his wife got married in December of 1940. In June of 1941, they were walking on the street. There was an arbitrary raid. He was pulled away from her arm. They were on their way to visit some relatives in Amsterdam. He was pulled away from her arm, sent to Mauthausen, never to be seen or heard from again. And that was actually the second raid. The first one had taken place in February of 1941, with the same detrimental results. Young men were picked up from the street, from their homes, from the place of work, sent to Mauthausen, never to be heard from again. So the case on the Jews really started in Amsterdam because that was the city was the city where the majority of Jewish people lived. So how did it begin? Everybody had to move out of their apartments, outlying areas, suburbs, whatever. They had to move to a certain area, which was then called a ghetto. And the reason being that once all the Jews were assembled in a certain place, it would be that much easier to just round them up and send them to the transit camp, which was in Holland, called Westerbork. And from there, every Tuesday, a train left to go either to Auschwitz, Auschwitz-Birkenau, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, Terezin, which we call Theresienstadt, and various concentration camps. And we all know what happened there. So by the time they were done with Amsterdam, now maybe I mentioned it, maybe I didn't, but I was born in a city called Utrecht, which was a provincial city. It was a main city, but not for the Jews. Most of the Jews lived in Amsterdam, but my family and many other Jews lived in a city called Utrecht, which is smack in the center of the country. So when the Nazis got through emptying out Amsterdam, emptying them out from Jews, they started on the more outlying areas. So by the time 1943 rolled around, they were ready for the outlying areas. And April 17th, 1943 was the last full day that Ellie and I ever saw our parents. We celebrated our birthday. I don't have a lot of memories of that because after all, it goes about 77 years back. But I remember being together with my parents and having a happy day. The next day, very good friends of my parents, whom we called uncle and aunt, they were Gentile people. And my father and the gentleman were colleagues. And when my father was fired, of course, because he was a CFO, his friend, whom we called uncle, quit the job and said, I don't want to work for the Nazis. I will do something else. And indeed, he and his wife joined the resistance movement. So on April 18th, 1943, they came to our house on the bicycle. They lived very close by. All the transportation in those days was on bicycles. I don't exactly remember what happened, but we were put on the back of their bicycles, with a little suitcase and with the promise that we would see each other within a few days or a few weeks. Of course, that never happened. So these people took us to our first transit home, which was a temporary home where they would receive children, and then the resistance organization would try and locate a more permanent place, and nobody knew how long this war was going to last. So there were not a lot of people, but there were some people that said, we will take the chance and take a Jewish child in for whatever the duration is. Nobody ever thinking that this war would last 5 years. So for me, it was a little easier to find a hiding place because I was blonde and blue-eyed, and so was the rest of the population in Holland. My sister Ellie, on the other hand, had the more Semitic look. She had dark hair, dark eyes, different features, so she had to be hidden well away from the public eye. So ultimately, they found her a place on a farm away from any public viewing, any public coming around. But for me, like I said, it was a little bit easier. And they located a family in Amersfoort, which is maybe 20, 30 miles away from my home city. And it was with a family who lived smack in the center of the city. A gentleman, my hiding father was an ophthalmologist. The wife was the medical assistant. And they had two little girls. The, the father was an ophthalmologist, the mother was a medical assistant. The medical practice was at home. And when I got there, I met the family and they had two little girls. I was 7. Pauline, the oldest, was 6. And Francine, the youngest, was exactly my sister's age, 4 years old. I arrived, they showed me to a big, beautiful bedroom in the evening, and they said goodnight. And what happened? I started to cry, and I said, why are you crying? And I said, I don't want to sleep alone. I want to sleep with my sister. Remember, she was born on my birthday, and I had always slept with her. So the very next day, they moved my bed to the girls' room. And from that day on, for about 2.5 years, well over 2 years, the 3 of us slept in one room. It was a big house because the medical practice was at home. So we were never allowed during medical practice hours to go downstairs because all kinds of patients, all kinds of people, including Germans, might come in and be patients and questions might be asked. We did go downstairs once in a while because after all, we were 7, 6, and 4 and not exactly 100% uh, that we stuck to the rules. In the very beginning, I was allowed on the streets until someone from my own hometown recognized me on the street with my hiding mother and the 2 girls and brought the word back to Utrecht to an organization. I was 7. I have no clue where, how, what. That Lya was seen in Amersfoort on the street with a lady with 2 other children, and she should not be seen on the street anymore. So from then on, I was no longer allowed on the street ever. The people that I stayed with were completely different from my own parents, even with their own children. They were a very quiet family, little reserved, very kind, but not the hugging, not the kissing type, not the emotional, demonstrative type, not even with their own children. I was treated like their own child. I can't remember having had any difference, but it was different for me because at home, yeah, I was the first born grandchild. I was special. I was being hugged and kissed. Luckily for me, my maternal grandmother had taught me how to read and write and do arithmetic by the time I was 4 years old. So I could read to the girls and we could entertain ourselves. Also, we got a little bit of homework. I was not allowed to go to school. And I don't believe Pauline was allowed to go to school, maybe because of the fear that she might say, yeah, we have somebody living with us. Nobody there, except for the parents, knew that I was Jewish. I was, if anybody would ask me, I was an evacuee from Rotterdam. Remember, I said Rotterdam was bombed out, everybody had to flee the city. So I was an evacuee from Rotterdam. That was my story. By the time I was 8, uh, the housekeeper that they had had for generations had to leave because she was no longer allowed to travel back and forth to her home. So they hired a new housekeeper. After all, there were 3 little girls by the time I was 8. The other one was 7 and the other one was 5. They hired a new housekeeper. I can't remember her name. She was young, and whether she had an inkling or a suspicion or was just curious or just wanted to interrogate a little girl of 8, one day she cornered me and she said, I don't understand your parents. What's wrong with your parents? How come they never call? Of course, the doctor had a phone. How come they never write you? How come they don't visit you? How come we don't ever see them? And I said, I don't know. I'm an evacuee from Rotterdam. I had to flee. I don't know what happened. I don't know where they are. Well, she wasn't happy with that. And I knew, I had a feeling she was going to really corner me again. So in the evening, I told my hiding parents what had happened. Had I misspoken, she probably would have denounced or betrayed the whole family, and at least the parents would have been deported. But I didn't betray anybody, and they were very proud and very happy that I had kept, stuck to my word. And I received the only candy that was left during those war years. So that was kind of the highlight. Um, for the rest, my stay with them was peaceful. They were very kind, different, but kind people. And they had more people staying with them, hiding, but not Jews. They also had like a bunker because this Amersfoort had a big railway station and had some factories, and the city was being bombed very often. So very often we saw them coming in, and we had to go into the bunker, which was equipped with blankets and water and stuff like that. The problem was I was not never allowed to go on the street, of course, but then the others didn't go on the street very much either. So May 1945 rolled around and we were liberated. The tanks rolled in, the trucks rolled in, the jeeps rolled in, Americans, British, from at the time Palestine, Canadians, everybody was there. The doors opened, the flags came out, and everybody was very happy. And we children, the 3 of us, we were allowed to go on the streets. The soldiers gave us chocolate and they gave us chewing gum and they gave us white bread, which nobody wants to eat today, but we were very happy to get anything. They gave us some cigarettes for my hiding uncle, my hiding father, and everybody was elated. People could go visit each other, which they hadn't been able to do for all those years. But after a few days, everything kind of quieted down, and I thought, now what's going to happen? Now I'll just wait for my parents to come. I was wise or old enough to realize that I couldn't stay where I was. So nothing happened for a few months. They never mentioned anything that I had to go or where would I go or I needed to find a place to live. Nothing was ever mentioned. Life went on a little bit different. Of course, we were free. I must say we were hungry, but never starving because of his medical practice. There were a lot of outlying people that were patients that came from outlying farms, and instead of paying guilders at the time, they brought us an egg or they brought us a little bag of flour or an ounce of sugar or whatever. So we did have flour bulbs, but we mostly made sugar syrup from it, from what I remember. Of course, there was no heat except in the, not the waiting room, but the office. And in the evening, we all congregated in the medical office because that's the only place where there was some heat. So May 5th rolled around, and May 10th rolled around, and May 15th rolled around, and I started thinking, now what's going to happen? No one knew what had happened, period. I wouldn't say no one, but in my circle, no one was aware of exactly what had happened. So I waited and waited. And then a couple of months later, one of my uncles showed up. That was an uncle that I had not been that close with. I mean, I knew him, but he and his wife lived in Amsterdam, and we lived in the province. We lived in Utrecht. But he and my father, of course, had the same mother. And the mother was, my grandmother was widowed very young. And so he and my father grew up in an orphanage because my grandmother had 5 young children and couldn't manage on her own. So he and my father had grown up together. So he located us, how we never found out. He located me and then he asked permission. He had also located Ellie, who was on a farm at that time. And she was very fortunate. She also found a very good home. There were a lot of children, all blonde and blue eyed, but she was kind of hidden away from the public eye because they had land and they had cows and they could always send Ellie away with one of the older kids to go and play in the land or go milk the cows or something. Because of her looks, she had to definitely stay out of the public's eye. So my uncle asked permission to take me to see Ellie, which of course was allowed. And when I saw her, she was from 4 to 6.5. I didn't recognize her at all. She was from a little toddler to a little girl. So all of that I know from her hiding mother because I do not remember saying, is that my little sister? But that's what she said I said. And then after about an hour, we got reacquainted. We got very, very close again. And from that day on, we've not been inseparable, but we've been very, very close. She has a she had her formative years on the farm with a super religious family, wonderful family, poor, but there was always enough food for someone else, for another person. They had a bunch of kids already. She didn't exactly fit in because she was dark haired and they were all blonde, but they all got along very well. And FYI, both of us still have very close connection with both of our hiding families and their children and It already goes down to the fourth generation. My grandchildren, her grandchildren know are hiding sisters and brothers' grandchildren because obviously the older generation is gone. So I spent a day with my sister sometime in June or July of 1945. And then I had to go back to my own place. So I said, I'm not going back because I won't see her for another 2 years. Well, I had to go back, but arrangements were made that her hiding parents would let me stay with her until our parents would show up. So here I was on parents number 3. My hiding parents, her hiding parents, all different. So we stayed with them until about November of 1945. In the meantime, life went on. We were waiting for our parents and we were asking every day, when are mom and dad coming? When are they coming? Why aren't they coming? Because we were little girls. We had no idea what had taken place. One day, her hiding mother, whom we called Tante Cor, Aunt Cor, called us in and said, girls, can you come into the front room for a minute? I need to talk with you. The front room in that family, it was a relatively poor family. The front room was used for Sundays only, Sundays and holidays. You couldn't play in there. You could play board games. You could read the Bible. You could just read. You could play the organ if you were so inclined, and just sit and talk. So I thought to myself, by that time I was 9, I thought there's something not quite right about this. Why would we go into the front room? It was a weekday. So that's when she gathered us, just the two of us and herself. She told us that our parents would not be returning. They had been, well, she didn't put it in exactly the same way, words that I would put it, but they would not, they had gone to heaven, which to my sister, she was 5, she was 6, pardon me, and having grown up with this religious family, going to heaven meant something completely different than going to heaven meant to me. So obviously we were both upset, but me being a little older, I was more upset. I realized what it meant and I was very angry and how could that happen? And then, children are pretty resilient. I thought, now where we're gonna go. So I was on parent number 3. I thought, now where am I gonna go? And I'm the oldest. How are we gonna do this? So the situation in Amsterdam, where my uncle and aunt had lived, was very dire. There was no food, there was no housing, there was no heat, there was no transportation. My uncle and aunt had been in hiding for almost 3 years in a stable in the northern part of Holland. And 2 weeks after liberation, they had a little girl. She was born 2 weeks after liberation. So my aunt was not exactly in the best of shapes. Her parents had also been murdered, and most of her family, and she was a young woman. So ultimately, my uncle decided that they were going to take care of Ellie and myself. Adoption was not allowed on the far out chance that parents might come back, they might have amnesia, they might not know where we are, etc., etc. So they became our guardians. Now, like I said before, my and was already heavily traumatized. So now she came back after the war as a young woman. They had one daughter in 1940, and then the second one, May 1945. So she went into the war with one child, one daughter, and came back to Amsterdam ultimately, and all of a sudden had four children. She was heavily traumatized. I understand that she may have been somewhat unbalanced even before any of this happened. So now I had parent number four, who were again totally different from my own parents, totally different from my own parents, I, and totally different times also. Cannot compare 1936 to 40 to 1945 and after. So we became part of their family. I was a very angry teenage, not a teenager. I was a very angry child. She was an angry woman, many times out of control. So she and I did not have the best of times together. But I must say, she was a very smart, astute woman. And she found out that there was an organization, it might have been the Red Cross, who would be sending children that had suffered during the war to Denmark. Denmark had clothing, Denmark had food, Denmark had transportation, they had housing, they had schooling. So we managed to get both Ellie and myself onto this group, and off we went to Denmark on a train, an overnight train, without supervision, with a group of other young kids, probably between the ages of 7 and 15, something like that. And when we got there, all the families that were present had signed up for one child. Of course, they called one of our names, and both of us started crying. We did not want to be separated again. So luckily for us, there was an older couple who said, we will take two girls. And we really had the best time of our life there. The program was supposed to be for 1 month. And I believe most children went back to Holland after the 1 month. However, these people extended it to 3 months. And ultimately, we stayed there for 9 months. So that was parent number five. They were wonderful. They spoiled us. There was food, there was clothing. We were treated like little princesses. Actually, we never really wanted to go back. But of course, the Jewish agencies said we had to go back. And after 9 months, we finally landed back in Holland, arrived back in Holland. And that is when our real life, after the war life, started. I can tell you, it was a difficult life. During the war, I was sheltered. I was with a very kind family. After the war, I was with Ellie's fighting people. They were religious, very kind family. That's not to say my uncle was an angel. My aunt had her issues and did not know how to deal with four girls, and certainly not with me. I was angry, I was aggressive, I take part of the blame myself, but after all, I was a child and I would have needed some guidance. Uh, my uncle insisted that all of us attend a Jewish day school. So by the time I was 9 or 10, I started fourth grade. like I said, my grandmother had taught me how to read and write and do arithmetic, so I knew a little bit, but not enough for fourth grade. So we had this wonderful teacher, and all the children in the same in that school had similar experiences. They had been either in hiding or in ghetto or with the partisans or in the forest or with their parents, without their parents. Some came back with a mother, some returned with the father, while we returned with nobody. Not as far as parents is concerned. So I completed grammar school in record time, of course, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. I was admitted to a very challenging high school, also a Jewish day school. I completed that curriculum in record time in 5 years, but all the time, all the while, I had a very difficult home life. Not impossible, but a very argumentative, controversial home life. So actually, my time right after the war was more difficult than during the war, except we had no parents. We were orphans. We were never special again. We were never number one again. And for months after the war ended, many of us would stand on a bridge and see if our parents maybe got off the tram or got off the train. Maybe they did survive until, of course, it became clear from the records eventually. And this is what we found out later. My parents had also gone into hiding after we went into hiding. However, they made a major mistake in my book and in everyone's book. There was a danger in numbers. They went into hiding together with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, two of her sons, which were my uncles, a daughter, all adults, my parents, and a cousin. So there were 7 people hidden in the village where my ancestors were born for centuries, for generations. Everybody knew my grandmother, our grandmother, knew our family there. It was a small village. My grandmother had a general store, mostly serving farmers with clothing and food and stuff like that. There was great respect for my grandmother. So they went into hiding in over two different houses, two brothers who were neighbors, and would have never been betrayed by anybody from the village because everybody knew them. However, there was a stepdaughter to one of the brothers who had a romantic liaison with a Nazi officer, plus the fact that there were 7.5 guilders on every Jew's head. For 52 guilders and 50 cents, she betrayed my whole family, all 7 of them, and trying to make a good impression on her Nazi officer boyfriend or whatever it was. What we heard later is that there was a bus that picked them up, and someone from the resistance who came on the bicycle riding into the village just saw the bus leaving, and all she heard was our mother screaming, "I want my children, I want my children." To our great luck, she did not know where we were because she wanted us so badly. Ultimately, according to a last witness, she died from a broken heart because she couldn't have us. Of the 7 people, only one cousin returned, survived Auschwitz, and she would never talk about anything. He would say, if I tell people, they're not going to believe me, and I don't want to be put for a liar, so I'm not going to talk about it. She's gone now, and with her, she took the last knowledge of our mother because she was the one that was with our mother up until the very end. So that is what we found out many years later. The woman that betrayed our parents, our whole family, I believe she was brought to justice. She got 6 months of prison term, and shortly after she died. I never met her. Our life in Amsterdam went on. I finished high school. I started to work. I didn't want to go on studying, wanted a little more independence. In 1956, Hungary was threatened by the Russians. And one day my uncle came home and he said, "Not again. We're not going through this again. We're going to the United States." And luckily, we had family in the United States. Remember, I said my uncle was married for 6 months. My uncle, the brother to my mother, was married to a woman. Her name was Margie. She survived the war. After the war, she got remarried and they immigrated to the United States. But we always were very close. We remained Ellie and I remained very, very close with her. And as a matter of fact, she died just last year at the age of 101 and 2 months, I believe. She is the one, she and her family had immigrated already a little earlier. She set affidavit, which is like a bond for all 7 of us. My uncle and aunt finally had a son that they wanted in 1949. In 1957, we immigrated to the United States as a family. We all went to work. Those that could work went to work. We decided to build up a new life. I met my husband in 1958. I got married in 1959. We had a daughter in 1962. And we were married 54 and a half years until he passed away. Now I have my daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren. And life goes on. Now we just finished the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, which brought up many memories, but not to be compared to my hiding time, obviously. And the last thing, if there are any students in the in my guest room, please be kind to your parents because you never ever know when will be the last day you will see them. It can be an accident, it can be a war, it can be a raid, it can be a betrayal, it can be sickness, whatever. And ultimately, I was saved, my life was saved by a student organization. And that's how I usually end my talk. But the students were the ones that found the hiding places for the children. They did a lot of resistance work because they were independent operators. Most of them had no families, no children, no wives, no, they were not married. They took it upon themselves to start different resistance organizations from the universities. So if there are any students among you, you have power. You have power, and please use it for the right cause. When you see something wrong, stand up and fight it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lya, for sharing your story with us. We do have some questions. from some of our audience members. The first question is, did you have any hesitation to leave your adoptive parents after you found your sister?
I didn't leave. I was there for well over 2 years. No, I did not have any hesitation because we were still very close by and we always have kept contact. And I talk to my hiding sisters almost weekly now. We've, like I sometimes say, I lost my own family and gained a new family. No, I did not have any hesitation because I wanted to be with my sister. But I never really left them. I visited them and I afterwards, and even from the United States, I came back, and both of my hiding sisters and many of their children have come and visited us. So it's not that I really left them. I just went to yet another place.
Thank you very much. Did you stay in touch with the people you lived with in Denmark?
I did for a long time. And then when we immigrated, we went back three different times. They invited us back 3 different times, where we got to stay like during the summer. And they were wonderful, but they were older. And then when we immigrated to the United States, it was much more difficult to keep contact. And when I went to visit Denmark many years later, I tried to find them, but I think they passed away. By now they for sure have passed away, but I could not find them. I could find where they had lived, but nobody knew what had happened to them. But for many years we did keep contact.
Thank you very much. Can you please share with the audience when you started to share your story and what prompted you to do this?
Um, in the beginning, child survivors, hidden children, were never recognized as being Holocaust survivors. Not by the older survivors, not by the camp survivors, not by our own people. So we kind of never spoke about it. I went to school with some of my co-students for 8 years, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade in grammar school, and then 5 years of this high school that was equivalent to at least a bachelor's. We never spoke about our past. We wanted to go on. We wanted to be like everybody else, but there was always an innate sadness among ourselves, certainly in myself. But we never spoke about our past. I never. We only knew that this one had a father, this one had a mother, this one was living with an aunt, Ellie and I were living with an uncle and aunt, etc., etc. So it was never imprinted on us to even talk about it. But things like that can fester. And by 19, I married a Holocaust survivor who was older than myself, who had been a Jewish resistance fighter. So he had a totally different story. So our daughter knows about it, knew about it from an early age, but not that we inundated her with our experiences, but it was just part of our experiences. Uh, but things like that can fester. And in 1992, 93, I had a very difficult life. The difficult period in my life, major illness, some other, my my cousin brother, who was born in 1949, he died in 1993. He was not even 44 years old. And he was actually almost like my baby because I was 13 when my aunt gave birth to this, finally, to her wishful thinking boy. He was an amazing person. He died in 1993. And like I said, I was hit with a major illness, which thank God I survived. And I don't think I had a nervous breakdown, but I realized that I needed help. It all came to help. So I went for some help, and that's when it was suggested to me that even though I thought I didn't have a story, I Ellie and I, we do have a story, and that it was suggested that I started speaking about it. So probably 94, 95. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you so much. How is your sister today, and does she live near you?
My sister, God really smiled down on us. For 40 years, we lived right around the corner from each other until her husband died about 15, no more, 16, 17 years ago. And she decided to move closer to her daughter, who is who has a larger family. And so she moved to her daughter's area, which is very close to the museum, actually. It's a wonderful community. She feels very, very at ease there. She's very much loved. And I'm staying in Santa Monica. She has turned to religion. Well, she's always been more religious and more observant than myself. I'm more traditional. I know I'm Jewish, but I don't stick to the rules. But she does. But that has no influence on our relationship at all. Matter of fact, for the first time in many months, I was able to go see her yesterday. And so she no longer lives around the corner, which is a big loss for me, but I'm happy that she's very, very happy. And she's doing very well, thank God.
Thank you very much. Do you know what happened to the maid who was interrogating you?
Yeah, she was fired after 2 weeks, I imagine. You can't fire someone on the spot, not even then. But my hiding parents, they had a lovely tradition or custom to come to our bedside because they both were busy in the medical practice most of the day. And then in the evening, they came to our bedside and they asked, what did we do? And did we get along? Which is surprising because there were three of us and we really got along very well. And I was able to read, so I could read books to them and we played board games. We never really had arguments, mostly because they are very calm and I'm not. So I guess maybe they let me do my thing. And so when I told them in the evening what had happened, they had to let her go because I did not think that she was really done with me. And I just insisted I was an evacuee from Rotterdam, whether she believed me or not. They had to let her go. So I imagine they gave her a week or 2 weeks notice. I don't remember. And from then on, we were kind of on our own.
Thank you very much. Do you have photographs of your parents and grandparents?
Yes, I do. but I don't have them here. I mean, not for the program.
Of course.
Michael, we need to set that up one day, that I
Yes,
should have a PowerPoint. I
definitely.
have, I always say the photographs survived, except the people didn't survive.
Thank you. Um, Thank you for sharing that. Do you know how the photographs survived?
I believe they were hidden, like many Jews try to hide some stuff, give some stuff in safekeeping with other people. Most of the people either had to sell it during the war to just survive. Many of them stole it. Many of them said they never had it. In our case, we did get the pictures back. I don't think we got much of the jewelry back. I don't know if my mother even had a lot of jewelry, but my parents were very comfortable. So she might have had some jewelry. I don't know. We did get a sewing machine was returned to us, and I believe Hanukkah, which my sister has, and the photos, because whoever had the photos, what were they going to do with it?
Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, I do have
Ah,
this
yeah,
on my computer. So, Leah, this is your mother and you.
yeah. I must have been maybe a year, maybe not even. And as you can see, I don't look like my mother at all. My sister looks like my mother, and I look like my father. I have the more blonde reddish look, and my sister looked like my beautiful mother, dark haired. Oh, Michael, you got it from the book.
I have these two
Oh,
photos.
okay, to the left is Francine, who is exactly Ellie's age. So she's 81 today, and she was 4 when I came. And in the middle is Pauline, who is 83. Yeah, 83 today. And you can see they're both sitting with a doll, and I always had a book in my hand. And I'm not exactly the happiest looking child, but I do remember that is a dress that my paternal grandmother sold in her little store. She had dresses, very good dresses, and then my maternal grandmother, she embroidered them and put a little collar on it, and so I remember that dress. And my hair at that time was reddish brown. I was blonde. I was blonde when I was born. Then I turned kind of reddish because when my aunt saw me for the first time after the war, and she said, "That's not Leah." She never had red hair, but it was me, and that was in the backyard of my hiding family.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for showing those pictures.
Of course. And one of these days we'll work to get some more so we can show more. I don't think I have a photo of your father near me, so or on my computer. But it- we're glad to hear that you do have those. So next time Leah speaks, we will show those. Um, Leah, how much do you remember about your childhood before you were separated from your parents? So basically, life before you were 7 years old.
Very happy, very happy. Uh, Always people coming over, like family or friends or neighbors. But my maternal grandmother was the really driving force in my family, in our nuclear family. She had my maternal grandmother had three two daughters and a son. My mother and all three of her children were murdered during the war, as were both of her other grandchildren and she herself. So I miss her terribly even today. Now that myself and my grandmother, but I'm glad she did not survive because if all your children and in-laws and grandchildren are murdered, it's pretty difficult to have to go on. And so we were the only two grandchildren that survived. And I know for sure that I was very, very special to her. I was not the first grandchild, but I don't know why. But she was over at our house very often, and she loved my parents and she loved us, and she spent a lot of time with me, teaching me how to read and write and do arithmetic and whatever else you teach a 4, 5, 6 year old. But remember, I never went to school until I was 9, yet I could read and do everything. But neither did the other kids in my particular school. So I can only remember that it was a very open family. Everybody was welcome. Everybody had a good time. We may not have been wealthy in the sense that people think people are wealthy these days, but it was a wonderful family life. And that I have up until the age of 7.
Thank you so much. What has it been like to travel back to the Netherlands? I know you've made several trips there since you've lived in the United States. What has that been like to go back to the Netherlands?
Uh, the first, I immigrated in 57, and the first time we went back was when Carrie, our daughter, was 7. It was 1970, and I wanted to show her my roots, and it was, and we were housed. By that time, my hiding parents had obviously retired, and they were in a beautiful retirement home, and they had rented us a room in the home that we could use for the duration of our stay in Europe, whether we traveled or not, but that was our home base. So it was wonderful to see them again. And it was nice to reconnect with those that we had left behind in 1957. It's been 13 years since I had seen anybody. You know, there were no jets in those days. I think we went by propeller plane. But it was bittersweet because there was we don't really have much of a family. And by the time I went back 1970, the few people that we had died already. But now I have a second cousin that we rediscovered maybe 10, 12 years ago. I knew him when he was a little boy and I was a young girl, and he's 5 years younger. And we have a very close connection. But going back the first time um, was had mixed emotions. But I was happy to see my hiding parents, Ellie's hiding parents, who became my refuge for a while, and we all became very, very close. And now when we go back, sometimes we go back together. we visit all these people and we have like a reunion and stuff like that.
Thank you. The family, do you know why the ophthalmologist business or the practice initially suffered after being successful?
No, they didn't suffer. What, I don't know what prompted that question. They didn't, I mean, the practice didn't suffer. He was very well known, but there was no money to be paid, and the money didn't matter anyway. You couldn't buy any food for money. So they were happy to get potatoes or flour or sugar or whatever. No, he was a very highly reputable ophthalmologist, and eventually he retired and they went to a, he was not, that whole family, his side, were not the best in the best of health to begin with. And in 1976 or 7, uh, I went to my hiding father. The doctor had passed away, and my hiding mother, who I always called Aunt Katie, um, she had gone to a retirement home or a convalescent home because she suffered from um, Parkinson. And the girls had warned me that she might not recognize me because L-DOPA apparently affects the brain. But I went to see her in the retirement home, beautiful, and she recognized me immediately. And she said, Lya, how nice to come, of you to come. And you've come from so far. And then after a while, it kind of faded away because there was some dementia there. But and that was the last time I saw her.
Thank you. How many languages do you speak?
French, German, English, Dutch. 4. No Hebrew, no
Well,
Spanish.
thank you so much, Lya, for sharing your story with us. We
You're
are
welcome.
so honored. We're so honored to have you as a part of our community. And as mentioned in the introduction, our museum was founded and built by Holocaust survivors, and your stories and the memories of the victims have always been at the heart of our mission and our museum and our work that we do. And we couldn't do what we do without you and our survivor community who works to share their stories with our community. And we thank you so much for doing this afternoon. And thank you to our audience for listening. And it's always nice to see that we have some of the same guests listening every week to different stories, because you're the ones who are going to remember all sorts of
And
these
and
experiences.
hopefully perpetuate,
Exactly.
hopefully share the stories, share it with your children, share it with
Yes.
your parents if you're a youngster, share it with your friends, because if we don't, we're bound to have to relive it.
Yes, thank you so much. And our viewers are typing in thank you as well. We wish everybody a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. And thank you so much again, Lya, for doing
You're
this.
welcome, Michael.
We hope to see you in person sooner rather than later. But in the meantime, everybody, please follow our website and our social media to see our upcoming programs. We have survivor speakers every Thursday, as well as other events throughout the week. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And thank you, Lya, for sharing.
Thanks, Michael. We'll see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
day. Thank you. Bye.